This is the Do Better podcast with Dr. Megan Miller and Joe Smith.
Welcome to the Do Better podcast. In today's episode, we are going to talk about autism acceptance. This is where we blast off to the final frontier in search of improving ourselves in the field of behavior analysis. Thank you for spending time with us. Now let us begin.
All right, Megan, welcome. And I'm so excited that we're here together again. It's been a hot minute, but I know there has been a lot of things that has happened since we last got together. So how are you doing, first of all?
I'm doing well, I guess. I think we're just like all at this point where it's like, is this done yet? Are we done with the pandemic? Are we done? It's over?
Yeah. You got your first shot, right?
I've had both of my shots, so I'm fully vaccinated. And I actually get to go on my first work trip on the 22nd of April. So about a week after this comes out, I will be on a plane for the first time in 15 months. And I could not be more excited about that.
Wow.
I need to see other humans in real life. I was thinking about it the other day. So I see Blake and I see my child. And then I occasionally see my people that I work with here, Jennifer and Justin. And I occasionally see my parents. And then even less, I might see my friend Na and my friend Megan Kirby. That's it. Those are like the humans I have engaged with for the last year in person. I'm like, what? Joe, this is so funny. So I was in St. Augustine and I'm walking down the street and there's this lady holding a plate of something and it looked yummy. So I was like, let me see what you have there that I can eat. And it was soap. Good thing I didn't eat it. But she was like, oh, would you like to try this soap? And I was like, sure. And then she was like, and we have all this face stuff in here. Would you like to come check it out? And I've had it on my list for a while that I want to get like a new face routine because I'm going to start seeing people in person again. So it's been on my list. You can ask Claire. I did a whole thing with her of like sending money. And if I met my goals, she'd send it back to me. So I'd have money to spend on my face stuff. And I get in there and there's one dude that I interacted with who was selling me on something. He gave me 4 different high fives. And I was like, first of all, pandemic, I shouldn't even be responding to this right now, but there was a lot of pressure.
Yeah.
And I high-fived him back. And after each one, I was like, I should not be doing this right now. But I was like, this is the first high five I've had in a year. What?
And you got it. You had your first high five with a stranger.
I know. And then, so he sends me over to this lady who wants to show me some other thing that they have. And when I finished with her, she gave me a hug. And I was like, what is happening right now? Why am I hugging a stranger? And I haven't even hugged some of my favorite people. But it was just so weird, oh my gosh. Yeah. It's been a year since I've not only high-fived or hugged people, but literally talked to people because I don't go shopping. I haven't been in a grocery store in over a year. That's just for fun. I like to do online shopping. I'm not scared of grocery stores or anything, but it's just convenient. And then I haven't gone clothes shopping. I guess I've interacted with the cashier at Target and I've interacted with my chiropractor, but that's it. I had not even registered how deprived of stuff I've been for the last year. So then when I'm why am I in such this state of I can't knock stuff out and I'm just feeling blah. And then that happened this weekend and I was this week and I was like, oh, So that's me.
Wow. I mean, on the same note, my wife and I last night, we went to our first movie and over
what? You went to a movie?
Yeah, we went to a movie.
No way.
Yeah. So up here, you remember Cinema Cafe, right?
Oh yeah, you've been talking about that place.
Yeah, I love Cinema Cafe. We love it. So we were like, okay, Godzilla and King Kong versus King Kong. Okay, we want to see this movie. We were going to watch it on HBO. I came home last night. She was like, okay, this is another thing. What do you want for dinner? I'm like the least picky person in the planet. Like I can eat anything. I can find something. And she asked me, "What do you want for dinner?" I'm like, anything. So she's like, "What are you in the mood for?" So then automatically it registers in my mind. It's Friday night. We haven't been to the movies. And she did tell me that Cinema Cafe was open. So I was like looking for movies and seeing what was open. And they had a showing. And this Cinema Cafe, you know, they used to have the stadium seating where you had your like desk in front of you and then you had your computer chair. Well, that's completely gone. Now they have the reclining sofas.
Oh, wow.
And reclining chairs. And I'm like, sold, because I know I have another space of 6 feet in between me and the other people.
Do they do it on purpose?
Yes.
Okay.
So if you book a ticket, automatically the next 2 seats are X'd out. No one can sit there.
Okay.
And it's a smaller theater, so it wasn't as crowded. So, and of course, I mean, like, the movie tickets were like $7.50 too. I was like, sold, let's go. And then I shared her picture and was like, hey, do you want to go? She's like, yes, let's go. So we went, and of course, our favorite thing to do is eat. I mean, like eat while watching the movie. So of course, I gotta get my chicken fingers in. Okay, I love chicken fingers when I go there. It's such a kid thing, but it's just so good. So we went. We had a great time. We saw the movie. We felt like it was safe, and you know, tons of hand washing and social distancing. You know,
Yeah.
but it was great. It was a great time. I loved it. My wife and I are both vaccinated too, so that helped.
Yeah, that's awesome.
So, but yeah, it was such an awesome experience, and it's been something that like we've been missing, because this is like, that was like our Friday night. We would go at least twice a month.
Oh, wow.
If not more. But yeah, if not more. That was our date night. And I'm glad that it's back now. So we already have like 4 movies that we want to go see in the next couple months, because Quiet Place 2 is coming out. That movie is amazing. The original Quiet Place, amazing. Yeah. Black Widow, I might go by myself because I love superhero movies, but I have to see that one. And then I think another one that's coming out that looks really good is, I lost it. I lost it, Megan. I can't think of what the other. It's okay.
I've paid zero attention to movies coming out. So
see, that's where like for me, like my wife and I are such a movie buffs, and we love movies. So I should know what it is because it's like on a list, but it's okay.
All right. Well, I'm glad that we're both starting to get back to more normal things.
Yes.
And hopefully I'll continue to have a little bit more of an upbeat engagement each time we meet. This is our first podcast episode we've done with just the two of us in like a really long time.
I know, like
a really long. I can't even remember when the last time was.
I don't even know either. Like, I mean, we had
because we had we did the one with Adrian and Tiana. We had Michael and Hillary. We had there was one that I did with Julie, or we did Ryan, and then I had Julie and the researcher, I can't remember her name right now. Then we had one with Adrian by herself. Like I just don't even remember. Maybe toileting. It must have been toileting a long time ago.
Yeah.
Or sleep.
That rings a bell.
Toileting or sleep. I can't remember which one we did last, but it was one of those two. So like over the summer. It's almost been a year. So
what's going on, Megan?
oh my goodness. Okay. And this
It's all
time
right.
last year, we were like being ambitious and putting out like 2 episodes a month because we didn't have anything else to do. So
Yeah, exactly. We were quarantined and, we were, and that was like when I was still a teacher, but, had my summer off.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah.
All right. Well, so today it's April, and this is our episode. We're recording a whole 5 days before it has to go out for April. And it's so, I'm sure everyone's seen the posts and things about it being Autism Acceptance Month. It, years ago was initially called Autism Awareness Month, but everyone's fully aware, I think, at this
Yeah.
point. And now the big push is to have Autism Acceptance Month. So we wanted to talk about that a little bit and just kind of dive in on Joe and I's experiences as behavior analysts around autism acceptance. And I do want to kind of give this caveat for our listeners that we're having this conversation to model having this conversation. Like we're probably going to say things that might not be accurate, or like where people want us to be on things, like especially if they've been doing work longer on this than we have, that understanding that like everyone's in a different place and understanding various aspects of the world, period. Right. So we hope that our listeners will listen to this from a place of curiosity and, we welcome any feedback, obviously, because that's how we grow and learn. But we also we're putting ourselves out here to explain and sort of help others understand like where we've got, what we've learned about, what we've gone through, what we still want to go through, what concerns we have, and hope that will give others the permission, the space to sort of do those same reflections and think about those things. It is kind of less motivating to have these conversations though, if there's this like tendency for people to just kind of hang on to like any mistake we might make while we're talking today. So I'm not saying, we're obviously going to make mistakes. We're going to, like I said, not say that all the right things. And we want to learn from that, but we also don't want to be like dragged through the coals or punished severely for trying to talk about our experiences with, growth and trying to better understand different topics in the field. So with that being said, the first thing that we were going to talk about today. Oh, I should also preface this too. Joe and I don't do a whole lot of prep for our podcast because we're both just very busy people. This one, our schedules have been pretty chaotic with spring breaks and with just a lot of like treatment planning and things on Joe's end. So we know what questions we want to talk about, but we also wanted this to be like a really authentic conversation and just really discussing where things have been for us. So we really didn't do any like notes or anything like that for this one. Usually we each have like a few bullet points, but we decided to make this a little bit more of just a conversation, to really just whatever comes to mind first. We're just going to kind of share it. So the first question is, what is our history with being aware of like autism acceptance, anything relating to like the neurodiversity movement, any of those types of things. So especially thinking too about like graduate school and like your training, or, Joe, when you were in school for education, and then me when I was getting my PhD. So any of those like areas where, there's a history of, we were being trained on some things, and how did like autism awareness, autism acceptance, neurodiversity, any of those types of things come up? So do you want to go first or do you want me to?
I'll go first. Thank you for giving that caveat. I think that's great because we are coming from a place of, curiosity, and we're trying to do better and trying to model having these hard conversations so then we all can do better in a field. So like for me, like I know when I was going through my graduate program, my bachelor's, even in ABA, just do my ABA coursework, it was still known as Autism Awareness Month. So with that being said, like a lot of the coursework when I was going through to be a special ed teacher, we were just being taught what what symptoms or what autism is, basically. We were just being aware. I mean, we were just being taught to be aware of it, and that not every child that you come across is going to be the same. And I think we were still using like movies like just different movies like back in the 80s, early 90s to explain that, just because this movie shows an autistic person doesn't mean that this this is the same for this autistic person is not the same for everyone. You're not going to come across this, like, everyone's different. And I think, like, with my background, like, that's where a lot of my teaching from graduate school and my undergrad came from. Um, Now, even now, like, it's now turning the tide to um, this neurodiversity movement and being aware, not aware, but accepting people who are autistic, and just coming to that place where now, how can we accept them as who they are? So I don't know if you had anything to add, Megan.
It sounds pretty similar to my experience. So when I was in undergrad, it didn't come up at all.
Yeah.
I also wasn't in this field. I was in psychology, but it wasn't really a thing. I don't even think Autism Speaks existed then or anything. And then when I was in graduate school, I think that was kind of starting. We did have a class on developmental disabilities where we learned, like you were kind of saying, like what the different diagnoses were and things like that. But we didn't really learn a whole lot about acceptance or person-centered planning or any of those types of things. And even in my master's program, there wasn't a whole lot. I still don't think there was a lot happening. It wasn't until I think I moved to Virginia, and the local Tidewater Autism Society had, every year they did like an autism walk or whatever, and we got involved with that. And that's, I guess, kind of my first memory of like there being a lot. And then of course, Light It Up Blue. And I got mad because our HOA wouldn't let us put a blue light in our development and all that. And even then, when all of that, so that was like 2010 timeframe, I wasn't really seeing anything about like alternative perspectives or anything. It was all very much centered around the parents and the support people for, like showing, that they were in the lives of an autistic person. And it really was all focused around awareness and those types of things. Then when I went to, I will say, and I've talked about this before, our ethics training and whatnot at FSU was of course top notch with Dr. Bailey. And there was a huge focus in our ethics course and just our courses in general on like not sort of going down the route that behavior analysis had gone before with like Sunland Miami scandal and things like that. And like the utmost importance of like being respectful of the learners that you were with and like your clients and all of that type of stuff. So it wasn't specific to a certain diagnosis. It was just in general, like you will humanely treat the people that you are working with. But then when I went to Ohio State, I was just reflecting on kind of, it's interesting because Ohio State, and this is one of the things that just jumps out at me overall with a lot of the things happening with like diversity, equity, and inclusion right now. It's like so hard once you start seeing it to like not notice it everywhere. But there's a huge focus at Ohio State on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We had to take like numerous courses on diversity, even like attend outside things where we would like have to find something in the community and attend that. There was like a specific 1 hour or 2 hour like training we had to go to that we had to like go to on our own time. That wasn't part of a class, but we had to complete it before we finished. And part of that was the grant we were on. But every single one of those things, disability was not discussed, period. Like it just wasn't, right? So like there's, you know, all sorts of education we're receiving on like the differences in race and like the presence of racism and systemic racism. And a lot of it was around racism. But there was still like even the one training we had to do that was like on our own time, that was a few hours long. There was a lot of different things discussed that around like sexual orientation and gender, and even like I'll never forget like how like it was basically like how you might, you know, unknowingly like offend someone and like how to respond to that. And like the guy gave an example of like one time he said he was starving, and his friend who had lived in poverty and like experienced starvation was very hurt by him saying that, because it was like the guy hadn't eaten for a few hours. So he was like, you don't know what starving is, right? So like even things like that came up of like these like sayings you might say that like you don't even realize could cause someone else to like have a hard time or whatever, but still no discussion around disability, around any of the things that are kind of coming up, especially on like social media right now and stuff like that. And still the big focus, like I did some work with Autism Speaks at Ohio State, because they needed some help from like, there's requirements for student organizations, and they needed a person to like be something. I don't remember what it was, but I was that person. And so like I helped with some of their fundraisers and things like that. And at that time, so that was like 2012, there was starting to be like more pushback on Autism Speaks, and like the Actually Autistic movement was coming, and that kind of thing. But they like all of my interactions with, whether it was the Ohio State program or in Virginia when we were getting licensure passed, like everything that was being done was beneficial, that I could see. And it, you know, typical nonprofit, big nonprofit criticisms, just like the Red Cross and some of the other ones where it's like, where's that money going? But in terms of like seeing, you know, the benefit for the families that I was working with, it was huge. I didn't fully understand some of the criticisms that I was hearing even at that time of like, well, listen to how the parents are talking about their kids. You know, what about it when that kid is an adult someday and he watches that video of his mom talking about wanting to kill him when he was 3, right? And I didn't connect with it. Like, it was just like, well, that's just, you know, kind of like, well, the bad isn't as, you know, the good outweighs the bad kind of stuff. And I never really took the time to like fully process it, or like, especially perspective take and think about like, what if I was autistic and I saw these ads, and then I'm like, oh, I shouldn't exist. People just want me to die, right? Like if that was said about any other thing, like blondes or, you know, redheads or women or like transsexual, like any other thing, if a commercial came out like that, it would have been like, there would have been such huge protests and like things. And of course that particular commercial came out before social media and like all the cancel culture stuff. Like if something like that came out now, I'm sure it would get shut down pretty quickly. Yeah. But even then, like it didn't register for me, like why that was so problematic. But I'll, you know, obviously as we talk about some of the other questions, I'll touch on kind of how that shifted and changed for me over time. I will say on the other angle though, so this was like ignorance, oblivious, all of those things. Like I was getting sounds like you too, like no training or like discussion around any of it. I was very intrigued in my like early 20s by memoirs books. So like I read a bunch of different memoirs of various authors. And then that led, once I started working in autism, I started seeking out memoirs from autistics. So I read Temple Grandin. Everybody was reading Temple Grandin, but I read Donna Williams, and I read Donna Prince Hughes, and I read Sean Barron. I always forget which one because there's an actual different person with the name Sean Baron Cohen. I think it's Sean Barron. Anyway, so I was reading all of those, and that was really interesting, and I was learning a lot from like those types of books, but still I wasn't necessarily like seeking out anything beyond that. And then I've also talked about, I can't remember if it was in a difficult discussion, but I was so fortunate to meet William in Panama City, who is autistic. And even though he wasn't super stoked about meeting me initially, when he found out I was a behavior analyst, he was, open to like talking with me. And I learned a lot, with my interactions with him and becoming his friend and getting to have those conversations. And there was a couple, this kind of goes back a little bit, but there was one family in Panama City that was very anti-ABA at that time, but they still they would come and go on trying to get services because they would reach certain points where it was they needed something. So I kind of got to learn a little bit from them as well, but it was more oh, these are the outliers kind of situation. Well, William never was. William was always just I am so grateful to know this man. But that family, it was well, this is an outlier. They're different. Whatever their concerns are about this, aren't real. And we'll show them a different way kind of thing. I never really took it seriously, if that makes sense. But that was in the past. So we'll talk about where we currently are with things as well. Do you have any thoughts or questions? I know I just said a lot of stuff.
No. That's neat. I mean, not neat that the fact that our background is very similar, where we were at, because it sounds like a lot, both of us didn't have a whole lot of experience from when we were being taught about being neurodiversity or autism acceptance. That wasn't in any training that we had while in our college courses.
Yeah. Which is just fascinating considering we both did, you did education, I did my PhD in special education, and then I have my master's in undergrad in psychology. That never came up.
Yeah, special education, ABA coursework, even in just gen ed classes like philosophy or any of our I went to a small Catholic university. They definitely had I had a couple classes on our religion, but none of that ever came up.
Yeah.
And it's just fascinating that, it's not just psychology or ABA, but in general, people aren't being from our time, no one was being trained or taught that unless you had an awesome program that. Yeah. But it's just fascinating to see how far, that wasn't that long ago either.
No.
No.
I feel, I'm older, but I'm not that old.
Yeah. What, 6 months older than I am?
I don't even know. I don't know if we've talked
I don't know.
We'll have to, off air, we'll talk about that, Joe. But my birthday is coming up in a month. So anyway.
Oh, we're going to have to celebrate that.
Huh?
We'll have to have a celebration birthday.
Yeah.
On the podcast.
That'll be fun. All right. So that's our history. Basically, we didn't have one. I mean, we had a non-exam, a not encountering period. Okay. So the next question I had then is what are we currently encountering, or have we recently encountered over the past few years? And what are we seeking out? How are we processing it? What's our current understanding of autism acceptance, neurodiversity, anything around that topic area? So I don't know if you want to go first again, or if you want me to go first.
I'll let you go first this time.
Okay. This is going to be kind of a long answer. So I will say that despite, reading the different books I was reading and really having the training of, having the highest respect for my clients, even doing the work I've been doing for the past 11 years on alternatives to traditional escape extinction and providing more compassionate and humane interventions, it wasn't until probably last year that I really understood the importance of incorporating and like listening to autistic voices. So part of the reason, if I'm being honest, is anytime, besides William, anytime I had the opportunity to really interact with, it was online in like a text-based format. I did not know the people, they did not know me. And the interactions just never went well. It was very aversive. It was very, very much like people criticizing me without even knowing me, is what it felt like, right? And I think a lot of us can relate to that. And I initially, like in 2009, when I encountered those types of things, I would try to like engage with it and explain and whatnot. I didn't see it as like it was from my ego, really. Like I was like, well, I know better than this. And like, I'll show you that we're better than what you're talking about. And like, I had personally experienced and been trained in the ways that these people were criticizing, but I also wanted them to know that like, there are better ways. And it was coming from my ego, but also for my clients, right? Because I had seen the great, amazing progress that the clients I had made. And I just couldn't stand the idea that there could be a family out there that had a child who would benefit from ABA intervention, not seek it out because of, what they were seeing from anti-ABA or I mean, I don't want to equate them, but like most of the anti-ABA stuff that I see is from people that are part of the neurodiversity movement, right? So to me, they're equal, but I know they're not really. You can be part of the neurodiversity movement and still support ABA. So I don't want it to come off that way completely, but that was my experience. So that was like my initial, like in 2009, it was kind of just like, let me try to help explain and like see a better way, blah, blah, blah. That never really went anywhere, and it became very frustrating and stressful, and I didn't like it. So instead of, again, seeing it as a learning opportunity or anything though, I just sort of disconnected from it. So like anytime I would see criticisms or whatnot, I would be like, I know I'm doing good work and I'm going to keep doing the good work that I'm doing and be respectful of my clients and be humane and compassionate and help others learn to do it that way too. And, hopefully over time things will shift. But I didn't see like why I needed to pay any attention to those criticisms, especially because I was one of the good ones. Like, why would I need to do that? So then again, I think like some people have heard this in various like Facebook lives and stuff that I've done, but having it all in one place is nice as well. So, last spring, there was the whole situation where there was a Facebook post that I made about the Cards Against Humanity game, just the game. It wasn't the ABA version. It was just the game. And it was actually right around this time. It was about a week ago this time. Mm-hmm. And I said like, oh, maybe we should play this at a social event we're having. And then Jeff Newman commented and he was like, something about like, well, are we ever going to talk about, the harm that was caused by the ABA version of Cards Against Humanity? And I was in the middle of hosting a conference and I was like, I don't have time for this. Yeah. Like, Jeff Newman, get out of here. So I just like deleted his comment and then like went on my merry way. And he messaged me and he was furious that I did that. And I'm not going to go into detail because we have a whole difficult discussion, the Cardgate one. I'll post the link in the show notes. But we, kind of dive in on what all happened there. But long story short, Jeff, taught me that like why what I did wasn't appropriate and how like harmful it could be. And we ended up having like an open discussion about the Cards Against Humanity. And then it just really opened my eyes to like how lacking not just our field, but society in general is on this topic, like on disability, broadly speaking, and then on like autism, the autistic culture, just like the autistic experience, like, and of course it's not just the autistic experience, like every autistic is going to describe different experiences likely. Mm-hmm. They may have similar ones, but there's just, it's not, I don't want it to come off like I'm saying like there's one autistic experience. That's not the case. But and to be fair, like I had gone to conferences and seen, some of the leading people speak, and I always enjoyed those presentations, but I wasn't seeking out more information and trying to really like grapple with like, how am I part of the problem? You know, it was like, I'm doing good work. I'm good. We're good. So throughout the past year, basically, because it was a year ago last week, I've done a lot more of like connecting with different autistics and trying to just understand their perspective, and following more Instagram pages and some Facebook pages, and just seeing the different content that's put out. And the biggest, I think, change for me that's come about is I've been creating compassionate and humane practices, in my opinion, for a long time, but I wasn't probably doing it at the level necessary of like the perspective taking piece of really looking at, who are we doing this for? Who is this the benefit of? Is it to benefit the rest of society and like make you seem more normal? Or is it to benefit you and your human experience and your agency of who you are as an individual? So a lot of that has shifted, and it was already a big part of what I did, but it's just like way more at the forefront of my work now, and really looking at, you know, why, like trying to take the perspective as much as I can of the client, like why are you doing these things? Like what is happening for you? And like whatever interventions I come up with, how are they most beneficial for you? And going to, again, honor who you are and allow you to remain the person you are, but also help like whatever skills could be supported so that you can navigate the world and have, you know, the most productive, happy life that you would like to live. So that's kind of where I am with things right now. But I guess I'll save that for the struggle. So that's like the simple answer. Just a lot more of like seeking out like different autistic perspectives and trying to get multiple examples of, you know, what people are saying. Really trying to understand like the different kind of asks that are coming out of like the Actually Autistic hashtag and the neurodiversity movement. Oh, one of the big ones I should say for neurodiversity, like I to be honest, I didn't really know what it was. Like, you know, I kind of committed to just not paying attention to it. Like that, oh, that's just not something I need to know about. But I really enjoyed Jeff and Joe did a podcast episode on Beautiful Humans where they kind of dove in on it. I've read various different, you know, people explaining what it means to them. The Autism Knows No Borders podcast from Global Autism Project has done a few episodes where the speakers discuss it as well. And so like, I have a much better understanding now of like what the neurodiversity movement is. So to me, my understanding is the idea that, that we should be open to the fact that that neurodiversity exists, right? Like there are various ways that like people's brains operate, and there's neurological research to support that. And instead of trying to fit everyone into like a box based on what the neurotypical experience is and like how they would do things, or me, because I'm neurotypical, we should be valuing and accepting of the different ways that people do things. And so like, for example, that could mean if I'm doing a presentation somewhere and like kind of before I do my talk, whenever that gets to happen again, in-person presentations, you know, maybe even like saying, you know, hey, sit, stand, walk around, like do whatever, like I'm going to be up here presenting, and like make sure it's clear that I'm not going to be like, why is that person walking to the back of the room and like wandering around or whatever? Because there's a lot of people, could be ADD, could be autism, could be any number of things, who don't learn well just sitting still, right? Mm-hmm. And instead of just trying to say like, oh, well, you just need to, because that's how everyone else is doing it, being more open to like, okay, cool, do your thing, right? And just like accepting that. So it's not to say that like any one type of way of processing or engaging with the world is better. It's just saying that like there's a diverse range here, and instead of trying to preference one over the other, we should just accept them, right? Now, obviously, for me, of course, some questions come up around that, and I'll talk about that in like the struggles part. But I think that's been a huge change, is having like a better idea. And what I've encountered, it feels like, with some people, both in our field and just in general, that they don't take the time to actually understand what neurodiversity is, like what that movement is about, and kind of like some of the other movements that exist. Like they just don't, they hear a thing and they see a person speak a certain way or do a certain thing or advocate for a certain thing, and they just get this like assumption of like, well, that's what this is, instead of really diving in and trying to understand it. So I'll stop there.
No, that's awesome. Like I think just piggyback off that. I think part of the reason why people see something and then don't engage in it is because like, oh, why do I need to learn about that? Because it doesn't directly affect my life.
Right.
However, it does, because you are going to come across those people.
Right. And you're either going to be the affecting your life. It's like, you could be contributing to these institutions that create this whole like putting like a higher pedestal on neurotypical behavior, or you could be helping to dismantle those. Right.
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Like,
no, I mean, like you could be attributing this issue, by not engaging and trying to learn more about it. And I think that's where I think society needs to learn. I mean, just take a step back and realize like that they are contributing to the problem by not engaging with it, or not learning more, or taking an interest. We're not saying dive into research that will take up like, weeks of your time. Just asking like for you to become more accepting of other people, but also to like seek out more information. I mean, you can binge watch, Grey's Anatomy for like 5 seasons. Why can't you binge or even just take an episode, and instead of watching an episode of Grey's, take 45 minutes and go listen to a educational podcast that's from an autistic person or a ADHD person. Just go and, try to do something else that will benefit the lives of others, and also make you a more rounded person too, to understand like the different movements in our society. I think that's where we as a society need to go. We need to realize like, hey, there are more things out here than Grey's Anatomy, which is an episode that season that I'm watching right now, and I'm totally hooked on it, by the way. But that's okay. But no, I think it's definitely, for me, like it's an area that I want to continue to research and look into. I know there's a couple people I follow just that talks about the neurodiversity movement. I know Kaylin, who's, I'm going to look up her name right now, but she posted a couple of different things on neurodiversity, and there's actually a book that she just suggests to read, which I have on my Amazon list. I actually downloaded it on my Kindle, so then I can listen my audiobook, so I can listen to it while I'm in the car. But the book is called Neurotribes.
Yeah.
And I really want I looked at reviews. It's a lot of people gave it a lot of great reviews, and I want to dive into that book and just listen more and become more aware, accepting of other people's perspectives.
Yeah.
I like also how you were talking about when you're at conferences, whenever you go to a conference, you're going to allow people, you're going to be open to people like, walking around or, standing up. That's something that as a teacher I've done in the past as well. So in my classroom, I know some students, they learn better by doing different activities, or how they engage with materials are a lot different. So those are called learning styles. So I accept, if you're a kinesthetic learner, I'm going to let you, or I'm going to create learning opportunities for you to engage in movement while learning maybe about tectonic plates, or let you move around and talk about the planets, and like maybe have a whole game with that, because I know not everyone learns best by me standing up there talking about planets and you writing down notes. It's just not going to happen.
Yep.
So I think that's an important. I like that idea, Megan. I really appreciate you um, thinking of that as a way to reach out to other people too,
Thanks.
who might not be the best at just sitting down and listening to you talk, even though you're captivating. And I love like hearing you and listening to you. Some people might learn better by standing and walking around and learn that way.
Yep.
So, um, and I think what would be really fascinating too is if even like if there could be more talks about from autistic people on their experiences with ABA, or just experiences in like schools, and have those talks in like in conferences. Like I would sign up for that conference in a heartbeat, and attend that, just because I feel like that's something that we don't get the ability to do as much or have that experience with. I think that's something that even colleges need to look into, is like having guest speakers come who are have different types of experiences, and share that with students as well.
Yeah. I know we talked about that on the last difficult discussions. We did one with Jeff and Mari, where we talked about like inviting autistics to do conference presentations. And one of the things that they brought up that I hadn't thought about is like, if you're doing that, it has to be done in a way that doesn't make them like a zoo
Yeah.
exhibit.
Yeah.
And they shared like a blog that was written about that. But it's one thing to, share information, especially if there are some people that like that's their speaking career, is to share what their life experience has been and to teach people based on that. But if you're like solely inviting someone to have them share like intimate details of their life, and like people in the audience are asking them questions, like Jeff talked about how like someone asked him a question about like his sex life or something, and it's just like, what? Like I've given hundreds of presentations and no one has ever asked me that question, right? Like, how would anyone think that's okay? So there's like that balance that has to be found. But it's also interesting to me that, again, as a field, like the bulk of the work that's done right now is in autism, and pretty much none of our conferences, I think Arizona ABA has focused had a few things, and then the Standard Acceleration Society had some stuff. But like, other than that, like pretty much none of our conferences make any efforts to incorporate the voices of the clients that we're serving, whether it's autism or anything else. And on top of that, like ABAI, even recently in the last few years, it's been like a big deal. If you like have had a chance to attend. So what happened was, this is wild to me. The whole issue happened a few years ago where Dick Malott, said the things he said at Cal ABA, and then that turned into this whole big thing for ABAI because they were supposed to be honoring him that year with an award, and there was a petition to remove it, and they did, but then they gave it back to anyway. But so during that year, they had like this kind of like town hall type meeting at ABAI where they basically were just like, tell us all of your grievances, like what could we do better? And one of the big things that came up was like accessibility. Like these conferences are not accessible for a multitude of reasons. They're really expensive for one. So for students, working parents, people who have like other like economic reasons for like having economic disadvantages, but also for a different age, like different disabilities, like you know, if someone's in a wheelchair, if someone's deaf, if someone's blind, like there's nothing offered at a conference where a lot of us are working and helping to support these different populations. Like what? So even if they wanted to come hear what we're talking about, it's like not even accessible. I will say that they made commitments to improve on that, and they did somewhat. There's still a lot of work to do from what I had read, but I hate to admit, but like when those things were brought up, I was like, I've never even thought about that. Cause like, why would I? I don't have any accessibility issues. Like the only time I ever thought about it was at ABAI in Chicago, when Jack Michael was there, and it was like, this is probably going to be his last ABAI. He was in a wheelchair, and that conference was so freaking spread out. Like I couldn't even get from one talk to the next with two very able-bodied feet in time. I was like, how is he, like, you know, obviously someone was helping to like push him around, but it was like, how is he going to get to these talks? Like, there's no way. This place is so inaccessible. And that was the only time it ever came up for me. And it wasn't even about me. It was observing him trying to get to talks. Right. So anyway, that one is just fascinating to me. And I forgot to mention this. I said it kind of with the diversity, equity, and inclusion stuff, but like I talked about how Ohio State didn't, but like nobody does. So, you know, I attended a few different presentations, conferences over the last year that were focused on diversity and equity and inclusion, giving people seats at the table. Every single presenter talks about race, gender, sexual orientation, all of those things. So even some, not as many, but some talked about socioeconomic status. Hardly any, maybe one, but it's not coming to mind even what that one would be, mention disability in a field largely driven by disability. Like what is going on? Why is this not a thing that we're talking about more? I don't understand. And how are people doing presentations on how our field leaves out marginalized groups? These same people who work with autistic individuals, and they're not including ableism or disability as one of those groups in their presentations. Like, I just don't, that to me, that just like highlights how blinded we are, like how ignorant we are of the fact that this is even a thing we should be attending to. And that like, obviously it needs to start in grad school, but it's clearly not. And then you see it play out all the time where it's like, I cannot even I've talked about this. Like I was shocked and surprised with George Floyd's murder and like seeing my Black friends share their real life experiences that I never knew about. And like when they did that, people listened and they were like, okay, what can we do differently? How can we do better? And I know this isn't like, it's not the greatest to make comparisons, but I'm gonna, because I just don't know what else to do. But then I see autistics speak up about their life experiences and people are questioning them. And people are like, well, have you read this article? Have you seen this thing? And I'm not saying that doesn't happen when Black people talk about their experiences, but it happens a heck of a lot less. And then of course you combine, like you look at intersectionality and like, obviously if someone is Black and autistic, it's going to be even more difficult to get someone to listen to them. So I'm like, why is that a thing? Why is it when someone is speaking about their race or their gender or their sexual orientation, our field is so generally like probably 90% of the time open to like figuring out what they could do differently. And then someone is autistic and they're speaking up about their concerns and their lived experience, and it gets questioned and it gets like batted around and it gets pushed around and people just want to throw research in their faces. Like I'm not saying that's never happened with some of the other isms and marginalized groups, but it's not like it is with autism. I just don't get it.
Yeah, no, I get it. And you know, it's interesting because like not all disabilities you can see either.
Right.
So, and I feel like a lot of people don't even think. But then again, like there's some disabilities that like hearing impairment is so difficult to like really pinpoint like who has it. Like I have a hearing impairment. I don't hear out of my left ear, which is why I like wearing headphones.
Yeah.
Because I don't need the left side at all. So like if you see like I have a one earbud, I don't need two.
Right.
But like when I go conferences, it drives me nuts sometimes because um, they're presenting and speaking, but I can't hear them because their mic is not turned up or that's making a weird whistling sound. And like, um, it's just interesting because like I know there's other people out there that have that same experience. They have a disability that's not always visible, but it does affect them when they go into social situations.
Right.
And no one, I mean, like, and I know I don't raise up my voice about it because I was taught to adapt and learn and try to adapt for the situation. Um, and, I do a pretty good job, but, you know, it, I wish like there's just a little bit more like thought put into like, hey, how could this affect others who have a disability that, how could this presentation be better for everyone if they have this certain disability?
Yeah. And that's amazing to me, Joe. I don't know. Amazing is not the right word. I guess it's not surprising, but also why? Like
Yeah.
why were you taught to just not tell people like what? Like why would we not teach someone like, oh, you can't hear out of your left ear, so you should tell people that so that you can learn and hear better. Like
So so my parents always taught me to look at, I mean, like just be aware of like how I could, hear better by like making sure I'm up at the front of the room, that I can see your face. So I would have to make the accommodations for myself so then I can, you know, so then it wouldn't be, so then I could like be more productive, and it's always like I have to do something different so then I can function in society.
yeah.
So
Which I mean is like kind of what we're talking about, right?
yeah,
With that.
it
But
is
like
like
what I don't understand is like how difficult. I mean, it's great. And I'm not saying like obviously it's good that
yeah,
that they taught you how to like do those things to accommodate for yourself, but and why not also be like, by the way, you can, speak up and say, I can't hear you. Right? Like you can advocate for
yeah,
yourself. And like request, and I know like there's this thing in our field that, or not in our field, in society that seems to exist where it's like the rest of the room shouldn't be inconvenienced by one person. And it's like, or why can't that one person speak up? And like, how is that inconveniencing the rest of the room?
yeah,
Like for them to ask, to turn the microphone up or to speak a certain way or something like that.
yeah,
I think hopefully we'll see. I mean, I've definitely seen shifts in schools and things, that not all of them, but in some, where they're more open to that kind of stuff. But it's so fascinating to me to think about like why that exists in the first place. That it was, instead of being like, these are the things that are different for you, so you should tell people so you can get your needs met. Instead, you just have to like do it yourself.
yeah. I don't know. I think part of it is also we come from a society like back in the day where you're expected to um, adapt to everyone else,
Yeah.
and you want to seem as normal as possible. And I put that in air quotes, like normal is not, everyone's different. Like there is no normal, but just like you have to take yourself and get yours. I mean, be in the best position possible to just be like everyone else. And I think
Yeah.
that's just from society, like our history and society. It's changing, I think.
Yep. Thankfully.
Thankfully.
And mostly, but like there's still obviously
There's so
some
much work to
resistance.
do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was funny. This is like not related really, but when you were talking about speakers being like turning up their microphone, or was like, Joe's never going to have that problem if he's watching me present.
Yeah, exactly. I never do.
I'm too loud.
I never do, unless it's the equipment's fault.
But I usually don't even need a microphone unless it's like a really big room, because I just project my voice so much. But anyway, that's a whole different different thing. Okay, so then the last thing that I thought we could talk about is like, what are some things that we've identified that we still need to learn, or is there anything that like we've been learning about that we're struggling to grapple with, or we have questions about? Do you want to go first, or do you want me to go first?
I think I'll go first. I think like for me, and I might piggyback off of you after you present too, but I think like for me, it's just learning more. I mean, just diving more into the neurodiversity movement and finding out ways to, even more ways just to make it more like their voice is being heard. Like, what can I do to really allow their voice to be heard? What can I do better to not be the problem? And I know part of that is by learning, but I mean, and by accepting their differences. But I feel like I don't want to be in the acceptance stage for long. I want to be also doing, I mean, in the action stage, where we're taking action as a society towards making sure people are included, making sure that we do things differently. So then there is, so then they don't feel, so like autistic people do not feel left out, or any of the different neuro diversity movement areas. What do you think, Megan? What's on your plate?
Oh man, I feel like there's so much. So it's like anytime I learn the different things, it's like new stuff. I'm like, oh, now I need to learn more about that. But so these are some of the things that come up for me. One is like the parents, right? So there's a lot of the issues that seem to be discussed right now, at least online. There's a lot of shade thrown at the parents. And that's really been difficult for me to grapple with, because I'm a parent. Yeah. As far as I know, I don't have a neurodiverse son, but who knows, he may end up with an ADD diagnosis someday. And I just know how difficult it's been just with him to like find self-compassion, like how hard it is to just be a parent when you're like responsible for yourself, but also another human, right? So like, I think a lot of the things that I talk about, with having curiosity and compassion and taking the perspective of the child, like I struggle with when I see people that are, advocating more for disability, that are potentially part of the neurodiversity movement or whatever, bashing the parents. Because to me, it's like, they don't know a better way. Like, let's look at society. Everyone in this movement is talking about how ableism is pervasive. Like, we all have to confront like things we didn't even realize were ableist, and like just like any other of the isms, right? Like, it's a constant work in progress. It's constant improvement, constant changing. So when someone has a child and it's like this society exists around them and they're learning history of deficit-based, woe is me, like this is how hard life is just kind of what exists. I don't know that going after the parent is the best way to like shift that. Now, I'm not saying that excuses anything or that like it doesn't need to be addressed. It's very difficult for me to watch how it's sometimes being addressed by some people who are very vocal in the work that they're doing to advocate for autistics, especially like they might be autistic or they might be an ally. But when it turns into bashing, well, really bashing people, period, but especially bashing the parents, because I just don't really see how productive that is. And like, we all are living a human experience. So like, to me, it highlights the lack of resources, the lack of education that the parents are receiving on how to accept and value and love their child. And that doesn't mean they don't. I'm not saying that, but like if what is kind of out in the public light is how difficult it is to have a child with whatever disability, then there are things that need to be given to that parent to help them work through that, right? So that they don't need to post publicly about how difficult it is. But just parenting in general, you can go onto any Facebook page and you're going to see parents complaining, just broadly speaking, about how difficult it is to be a parent. So the idea that that would ever go away, and like everyone's going to have their different values around that also, like it doesn't make someone like a bad person if one of the ways they cope and navigate being a parent is by talking to people about it. Now, everyone, again, is going to have their different perceptions about that. Like, well, what if your child saw that later? Or what you're putting out in this public limelight, if your child saw that, are you good with that? So like all the things I post about Taylor, Blake would never, like, he's just not public like that. But I would never put something out that's like embarrassing for him, or, over time, if he told me it was, I would make sure to get rid of it. But there's a lot of people who would probably say like, Megan, you're putting too much information out there about your son. But it's like one of the ways, and if he tells me not to video or take a picture, I don't, right? Like I honor that. But there's just like, we all have different values. I don't know around that. But the bigger piece of it with the parents is, this kind of goes to one of the things I want to learn more about too. And it's the strength-based planning in social work, especially. There's such a focus on strength-based planning and strength-based assessment. So that's one of the things I'm working on for this year, is trying to like revamp our assessment process to have more of a focus on strength-based instead of deficit-based. And I think like when, as behavior analysts, when we're working with families, that's one of the big places where we could be impactful, is helping them. We come in and we focus our like intakes and our assessments around all the things the kid can't do and all of the hard things that exist. And we spend very little time on like recognizing the strengths and like the things to praise about someone, So I think just if we commit to shifting that, then that helps shift their frame and their perspective, right? And that's one way to help a little bit. But overall, I would like to see people have more compassion for the parents, and instead of attacking them, coming at it from an angle of like, by what you're posting here, things seem to be difficult. Here are some resources, right? Yeah. Here are some ways you could see your child in a different light. Like, I don't think there's any problem in making that argument of like, what if your child read this? Or like, how do you think it makes, like when autistics read what you're saying about your autistic son, and then they all feel that, right? Like, oh, this is what people think of autism. Like that needs to be pointed out and named, and like, as this is problematic. But then to bash the person on top of that, I don't see what benefit that's having, and like how that's going to shift the person into engaging in better ways. Like, what's their replacement behavior?
Yeah. I mean, like even for me, like just thinking now, like parents, like the parents I work with, I mean, a lot of them are very aware, but they still struggle, like even with, just trying to get like like a lot of them focus on like trying to get the right services for schools even. And you're adding something else to the mix. So like, and they're just trying to do their best as parents.
Yeah.
And it's like, it's just, and I really have a hard time understanding why you would bash parents. Because a lot of them are coming from a good place and they're just trying to do their best with what they're given. And
Right.
some of them just do not have the education that um another parent might have. And you're fighting that too.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't like the idea of bashing parents, and I do struggle with that. But also there was something else that you brought up, but just about parenting, and I had it, but I just
Sorry. I
lost
just
it,
kept
Megan.
talking
No,
and talking.
okay, fun talk. But that's okay because it will come back to me. But it's just I do struggle with like bashing parents and how and just like, oh, it was about strength base language, and I think the struggle with that is just insurance companies, because you're coming from like when you're working with them, you have to discuss the deficits. They want to hear
Right.
the deficits, not the strengths that this child has. They don't want to hear about how much progress they have been making.
Yeah. And I think that there's a way to balance that, with what gets sent over to the insurance company, but then the conversation and the framing we do with the families,
Mhm.
right? So there you can accomplish both, I think. But and that, like, there's been research to show that having like especially moms, there's the research of like the amount of stress they're put under with raising a child with a disability. And I understand, like, for years the focus has been on how hard it is for parents, and like that, like if I were the person with the disability and I was seeing all of that, like that would be a very negative experience for me. So I'm not trying to discount that, but I hope to see a way to point out those issues
Yeah.
so that we can all learn and do better, and still understand that the humans that are like they really are, like it or not, it still is as stressful as being in a war zone. So given the current supports and resources in place. So that sucks, but that's the reality of the situation. But that shows how many more resources are needed, and like how much better framing, and like how much we need to change as a society. It doesn't mean that this person who is just trying to do their best, it should be told that they need to be like, killed or something, right? Like it doesn't justify that. So that is one piece of, and I know like it's such a small number of people that do those things, but it's hard. I definitely get contacted frequently when people see that I'm doing more to support the neurodiversity movement and like amplify autistic voices. This is my other ask for people who, for whatever reason, aren't on board with that, listening to your clients. Don't assume that everyone in the neurodiversity movement is acting like that. Like the vast majority of the people are exactly what the movement talks about. The neurodiversity is something we should value and accept, and we're all living different experiences. So like I think that's a problem too, where people who haven't really followed the movement or whatever are like just pushing it aside and like, oh well, these are just mean people that like, don't understand others or whatever. And of course, unfortunately, some of the parents that I'm thinking of that are like influencers and whatnot aren't necessarily making the problem any better, because instead of I understand it can feel good to like share, this is the crap I have to take for like supporting my child or whatever. But again, I don't see what that's accomplishing. So like, why are these like turf wars or like these like divisive battles happening when like the focus should be on how each human can like live their best, most fulfilled life? So if someone's like throwing shade at me, like I could throw shade back at them, or I could just be like, you do you. And like, if there's something I could learn from what they threw at me, I'll change whatever I need to change. But it doesn't mean I have to throw shade back at them and like create more of a problem, I just like, it's like, who's going to take the higher road? And just like look at this growth aspect and like what are the things we can learn? And so I guess there's so many more things I could say, but I'm gonna try to end it on this. So in terms of I think based on what I've seen, that all parties would agree that the goal is for each child or adult or whatever that is autistic or part of any other diagnosis of any sort to have agency, to be independent, to be respected, to be given opportunities to self-advocate and the skills to self-advocate instead of suppressing those, which is sometimes what our interventions do. And to really take their perspective and look at, are you doing with this person? Like, is this with them? Is it, for their benefit? Is this something they actually want? And then, great. Or are you doing things to convenience yourself and like the rest of society and to like normalize stuff? Now, I guess I shouldn't say like all parties would agree, because I think there's still a large part of our society that hasn't really understood why the like normalization part is problematic. But all like the short like piece of it of like each human should have their own agency and like get to live the life they want to live. I think everyone could be on board with that. But the where the issues come in is like within that, there are people who engage in very dangerous responses where they're harming themselves or they're harming others. And what needs to change though is how we talk about that. It's not, we shouldn't be talking about it in like such a negative, like how difficult it is for the people around them, but it should be more like, wow, if this is where they're going with things, like how are we failing this person? Like what are we doing that's like resulting in this stuff happening? And like, how can we shift that? And like, again, going into more of that strength-based piece. So I guess like I'm hoping for a day when behavior analysts, people, whether they're behavior analysts or autistic or just in any field and any part of our society, for any diagnosis or any disability or any different way of living, could just accept that everyone is going to have like a different experience and give people space to live the life they want to live in a safe way.
Yes.
That's not too much to ask, is it?
No. And I think that's fair and that's right. And that's what we all deserve, is the space to live the life that we want to live. As long as it's not harming other people, as long as you're doing things that are safe, I feel like we should be able to live our life the way we want to, and be heard. And yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Megan.
Well, we'll see.
We'll see. I mean, like we said, like beginning, like this is coming from a part of us wanting to do better and learn more. And we are, I mean, I still feel, and we are modeling this conversation for others.
Yeah. And what you say or what I say isn't necessarily like the answer. This is just where our thoughts are.
This is just our thoughts. And if someone has a different opinion, I mean, we're more open to listen and learn from you and have a conversation, because nothing's going to ever get done or nothing's ever going to get changed if we can't have a conversation and be open to each other and learn from where you're coming from. Because my experiences in my life are different from your experiences. And the only way that I'm going to know any different is by listening to other people or engaging in a conversation about what those differences are and how we can go about, changing our opinions, or how can we make this life for everyone much better.
Yeah. You're going to be disappointed, Joe, but while you were talking, I thought about one more struggle that I'm having. So
Megan, it's fine. It's fine.
I know, but I feel like we both said like really good closing things there. And then I'm like, oh, we're gonna get another thing. So the other struggle that I have, and that like, it's kind of like, I don't know, this elephant in the room. I don't even know why I didn't think like why it didn't come up when I was talking before, but obviously is like, so what's the role of ABA then? Right? Like if most of the things that we've been trained on and taught to do does seem to be more about like a normalization type thing where it's like, well, most people act this way, so we're going to help you learn to act that way too. Like, so what's the point? What are we doing? Why are we here? I see that kind of come up a lot. And so this is where I am with it. It might shift in a few years. People might think they might disagree with me, but that's one thing I hope people will take away from this episode is that it's good. It's okay for us all to have different opinions and perspectives. Again, but I would like it to be in the framework of being respectful and like open and curious, right? So just because like I might say what I'm about to say and Joe, you might disagree with me, or like one of the listeners might not agree. That's okay. We don't need to like get upset with each other about it. We could point out like, and this is why I say I might shift, like I might share what I'm going to say. And then someone else might say like, well, have you thought about this? And then I might say, no, I hadn't, but this is where I am. I'm not changing. Right. Yeah. Or I might say, no, I hadn't. And that's a great point. And now I need to shift. Right. We all have different values that we're living our lives based off of. And we have different ways that we're going to approach things. And that's how innovation and progress happens. And if we're all going down like a certain silo and just like all like, oh, we must think this way, that's going to be problematic at some point as well. So anyway, but this is where I am with like, so what's the point of ABA then? So as it comes to like autism, right? Like obviously ABA is a science and there's a million different applications. I'm focusing on autism. So for me, it's my role is to first, again, doing more of like the strength-based piece, engage in perspective taking and really look at like, okay, giving this person agency and autonomy, what can I do that they're like wanting help with, right? Like how can I best support them and like navigating the world based on what they're expressing are their needs and their goals. And if they're too young to do that, then the point would be to do that with the family and like the stakeholders, but from the perspective of we're here to serve this child. Like again, from that perspective of we are here to help them have like their best autistic life, not their best masked neurotypical life, right? So and without forcing my values though on the family, if I had a family come to me and I said like, my role as a behavior analyst is to really with anyone, like whatever goals that the learner has is to set up environments to achieve those goals. And if the family was like, well, we want our child to X, Y, and Z, and it was like a bunch of like masking neurotypical stuff, I would say, well, that's not, those aren't the things I work on. That's not what I address here. So, we're going to have to refer you to someone else. But and I can try to give them resources and explain why I do it that way and like where I'm coming from. But it's not my role to like try to force that on them. Every family is going to have their own values. Just like if I was working with doing parent coaching with like whatever families and their kids didn't have any diagnoses and they had different values around like discipline and there's helicopter moms and there's free range moms and there's this and there's that. Like, it's not my job to like judge and like say like, oh, you're a helicopter mom, you should be a free range mom, or you're a this and you should be a that. It's, what are the goals for this ecosystem, for this unit? And do my values align in a way that I can help support that? If not, then I'll have to refer you somewhere else. Right. I think so that's for me where things come in. But I don't go like, there's kind of like some to me that are like, there's like some more extreme approaches where it's like, and the same thing happens with parenting, where it's like, you always, you don't do anything unless you have like full on permission and all this kind of stuff. And I'm like, especially, I thought age 5 was going to be easy, but man, Taylor, he's like, it's like he's like 2 again, but with the attitude of a teenager and the strength of a 5-year-old. You know, like no matter what I've done to like help support him and making choices and like having a strong, loving relationship with him, like that stuff's going down. And I'm sorry, but there are moments where we've had to like pick him up and move him along, right? It's not our go-to. It's not what we're going to start with, but like that's just where we are. And there's parents who might judge me for that. There's parents who might judge me for not doing it sooner. Like everyone's going to have their judgments, but it's like, this is our unit, and this is like how we're approaching things. So I share that from the angle of same thing for being a behavior analyst. Like if families have their different ways, their different units, and like how they're operating and what their own systems and values are, it is not my job to come in and judge that and try to take it to some sort of extreme based on my own preferences and values, whatever that extreme might be. It's my job to do what the best I can, again, to help have the best autistic experience and give like education and resources. But if the parents choose and say, well, like X is still going to happen or Y, then at that point I have to make a decision of like, okay, well, I'm not the best fit for your family then.
Yeah.
Or maybe I still am. I don't know. It would depend on the situation. So that's one of the big things like that I really grapple with, and I see come up quite a bit. So the last piece I'm going to say on it. So just as an example, like if, in the past, if I was brought in to like work on something, say for example, like escape related challenging behavior, initially I would have done like more of like the 7 steps and like help, you know, make sure we're being fun enough and like there's motivation and all this kind of stuff. And then when the learner like doesn't want to do the thing, we would, you know, kind of hold out, wait, all that kind of stuff. And then it's, you know, we're not forcing them through anything. We want them to choose to learn, blah, blah, blah. Now though, it's more of like teaching all of the like thinking about like, if it were me in that situation, what are the different things I might be doing? I might say no. I might say, I have a headache. I might say, meh, I'm not really feeling this right now. And especially as like a full-blown adult with a job and a child, there's things in my day that like I don't do. Right? Like I'm like, oh, I have emails to answer, but I'm not going to do that right now. Or I need to get this thing done, but I'm going to wait for a variety of reasons. And I have the skills. Like if somebody were to ask me, I could explain it to them. But a lot of the times, autistic or not, children are just expected to like do this stuff that like adults are never expected to do. And it's like, how are we expecting a 5-year-old to like navigate stuff that like a 30-year-old doesn't? Like, why does that seem to make sense? So from the role of like, instead of, it wouldn't just be like, this is the way it is, you have to do it. Like I'm shutting down the environment until you do the thing. It's more of like, okay, like, let's talk about this. Let's come up with a plan. Let's coach. Let's see, let's like, here, do you need these self-advocacy skills? Or you needing some things to help you cope, like some ice or a drink of water? Like, and it's really building up. So there's so many skill repertoires that still need to be built, but they're built around self-advocacy and teaching how to navigate and like address whatever physiological emotions are coming up. And like, how do we, you know, when I'm feeling really stressed, like how do I bring myself down from that? And like, what things can I do to support myself? There's so much that can still be taught. And truly, when you look at the DSM and that if you're providing medically necessary care, the symptoms of autism, like that's all the stuff. Like that's the stuff that we should be addressing. Yet we're over here with like these laundry list of things from assessments that we've been given that we're supposed to be teaching instead. If we focused on those things, we'd be more in line with what the DSM is saying needs to be addressed anyway. But B, we're setting up a broader repertoire of like skills for life, right? It's not like this checklist of like, oh, you can man, you can tact, you can, it's, oh, you can advocate for yourself. You can tell people when you need something. You can walk away if something's too loud, right? So anyway, I thought I was going to be faster than that, but that's where I am.
No, I love that. Like, and that's the big elephant in the room, like, and I agree with that. It's like, I feel, like there's going to be 16-year-olds that's not going to want to put away the dishes right then and there, or to clean up their room when you're told. I mean, like, there's like things like that just makes me like, yeah, no, I don't even do that. I don't wash the dishes. I let them in the sink for like maybe a couple hours, maybe a day or two, Um, so why are we expecting someone that's in their teens to do that,
Yeah.
And I mean, like, and I love how you brought up the point about assessments too. And I would love to see, I mean, I can think a couple off the top of my head that's similar, but is there any kind of assessments out there for BCBAs to use that really gravitate more towards like self-advocacy, or more towards these skills that that would take into the consideration of what would be best to live out the best autistic life?
There might be in like disability studies or something that I'm not familiar with, but I haven't come across anything yet. But that's part of the work I'm doing. So what I want to do, and I'm putting it out there, world.
Yeah.
I've told people here, like Jen knows, but I haven't like broadcasted it fully. So hold me accountable by December, hopefully sooner. What I'm working on is taking things that are more from like social work or parenting, neuroscience, that are focused on these types of things for just children, period. And then putting that, like coming up with something that we could use in designing our interventions with our autistic clients or any other clients. So it won't necessarily be research based, but like hardly any of the assessments we use are. So, but it'll be derived from things that have been researched and shown to support those types of skills. I would say like Warner, Leland, and August are probably, August Stockwell, they're probably two of the people that I would guess if something existed, they would know about it. And then of course, a lot of, the autistic self-advocates and things like that probably know. And that's obviously going to be part of the work I do, is I want to pull all of these resources together and then work with some of the people I've met over the past year to, review what I've come up with or contribute to that, so that we can come up with something to help. It's not that like our science is so powerful and we can teach such amazing things, but like if we're being told that some of the things we were originally, now let's keep in mind when Lovaas did his original study and picked the skills that were going to be taught, he just pulled that, right? Like he just, maybe the parents said they wanted it or whatever, but it was all arbitrarily chosen, right? Like that these are the things that need to be learned. It just so happened that when those things were learned on the surface, it appeared that it was a better outcome for half of the people, right? So and nobody ever talks about the other half, by the way. That's a whole separate situation. Maybe we can have an episode on that. But that was on the surface, and since then there's been debate about that. But just because our history was those are the things that we designed our skill acquisition around, does not mean our future or our current present has to be that way, right?
Yeah.
If there are actually autistics telling us like those aren't things that we're concerned about, we should be listening to that. And there's also the concern that, there are potentially individuals that maybe, again, it's not the autistic experience, right? So like there's going to be different preferences and different skills. So it's not saying like, oh, well, this one autistic Instagram account said X. So there we go. But it's getting those multiple exemplars so we can start to have a better idea of like, oh, these are the types of things. Or, really, really, really closely observing our learners free operantly and seeing like
Yeah.
what are they trying, like what are things that like where their goals are going, like what are they trying to achieve and how can we help them get there, as opposed to just coming in with our list of like, well, these are the things people told us we need to teach you, you know.
Yeah.
Now obviously
Yeah.
it's going to be different if you're working in a school setting, and that's again could be a whole separate podcast too. Like the education education in the United States needs all sorts of reform, but you know, if you're in a school setting, your hands are a little bit more tied around like what the state or whatever is saying needs to be taught. Especially if you're working in like in the home or in the clinic. And this made me think of, sorry, one last thing that has come up as a struggle for me, that I've mentioned before, is a skill deficit that I'm definitely, probably my biggest one, is the whole understanding around like intersectionality. So Joe and Joy Johnson, they did a podcast episode with Beautiful Humans, and I'll put that in the show notes as well, where they talk about the intersectionality. So one of the things they pointed out is like a lot of the voices that are so amplified right now from the autistic community are white women.
Mm-hmm.
So that's not necessarily going to be representative of like all the diverse voices that exist around, you know, what preferences might be or like things might want to be taught. And like one of the big examples that tends to come up a lot when looking at, I think Joy might have mentioned it in the podcast, but like if you have like a Black autistic son, there are probably going to be some masking things that have to be taught so your child is not shot and killed by a police officer.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Just like any other Black child, you know, like that there are things that as white people, we don't have to worry about for our children. And so like allowing one voice to speak, and just like you and I are just two white voices speaking on like what we've learned right now, and there's going to be different perspectives. So I think like if you haven't listened to that podcast episode yet, I highly recommend. Beautiful Humans did the one, they've done 2 on neurodiversity, and then they did that one with Joe and Joy. And I just learned so much from it. So making sure when you're listening to different perspectives that you're including a diverse range of folks, and that you truly understand they don't speak for everyone. So your commitment, your framework, or at least for me, is I'm here to try my best to understand the human in front of me and give them the best life they want to live. And not even give them, but like help support them in obtaining the best life they want to live. And so I can, some of my like attempts to understand their perspective are probably going to be informed by some of the autistics that I'm following. Like, oh, I wonder if, but I'm not like blanketly like, oh, this person said this, so this must be what's going on for you and what you want, you know?
Exactly. And I think that, and you brought up a good point that, Beautiful Humans is a podcast. There are tons of voices on podcasts that you can listen to that they give their experiences of being autistic as well. And I think that's a great avenue for someone that's busy to constantly go back. I mean, like in order to learn more, is to take a podcast and start listening to this one person. And then every day, just change up the person that you're listening to. Just get a wider range of the scope of how they feel, and just be and hear different voices. So that's on my plate this week. It's like I want to do that this week.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I was like, I don't know how long we're going to talk.
we talked for probably 2 hours. Yeah.
We already made our closing remarks before I made extra points. So go back and listen to those. But no, do you have any closing thoughts, Joe?
No, I think we hit a lot of great points, and then we have action steps that I like to. We talked about different action steps that we're going to take. And if you thought that those action steps are something that you want to partake in, please do. And then let us know about
action steps.
Additional. Maybe even give us your feedback about your experience with the action steps, or like what your plan is, or if you heard something on this podcast that made you really upset or angry, please reach out to us and talk to us. We're only two human beings that we make mistakes too, but the only way we're going to learn is by making mistakes and having a conversation about that and what we can do better. So
awesome.
that's all I
Thanks,
have,
Joe.
Megan. No problem.
Perfectly said. I don't have anything to add. So we hope everyone will go forth on their quest to do better.